Hello all, and in this particular video lecture, we are going to discuss about Samuel Johnson, who is one of the renowned figures in English neoclassical criticism. So let's get started. So, Dr. Samuel Johnson is a famous English neoclassical critic. He is widely known for his great scholarship in classical literature as well as in classical criticism, and he is a popular anti-intellectual. He being a very intellectual man for his great scholarship and his pursuit of knowledge, he himself hated intellectualism and he wanted to bring down literature to the masses. So he was always of the opinion that literature was being widely read and appreciated by the aristocracy. And in turn, Dr. Samuel Johnson wanted to democratize literature by bringing literature to the masses and thereby bringing about more enlightenment to the ordinary people. Now, let me move to the presentation on Dr. Samuel Johnson. So here you go. Here's a presentation. Now, let me repeat the major points that was already said. Samuel Johnson is the most widely known figure in neoclassical age owing to his classical scholarship and his anti-intellectualism, and he tried to bring literature to the masses. So I think the point, this idea is already clear to you. Now, according to his biographer, James Boswell, let's look into his comment on Samuel Johnson. This is how he had commented. Samuel Johnson is a friend, philosopher, and a guide. So all three combined in one individual. Now, his life was immensely rich with creative, appreciative, literary, and critical pursuits. So he was a writer, he was a critic, so everything. So there was nothing, no area in literature which was literally not touched upon by Dr. Samuel Johnson. And you might also remember that he was also a lexicographer, a creator of a dictionary. Now, when you look into the critical parts, when you look into the criticism as such that is put forth by Dr. Samuel Johnson, in fact, it is very little. Okay. Now, having said that, now let us move into his opinion on literature. What is his judgment of literature? What is Samuel Johnson's opinion of literature as such? Let's see. He believed in a direct relationship between life and literature, and hence literature caters to a good life and what is born of experience. So according to Samuel Johnson, life is very much synchronous with literature. Literature is an apt portrayal of life, and hence the study of literature, the perusal of literature, the analysis of literature is very important in human life. And hence, he propounded the reading of literature. And literature, according to him, should aid the readers to enjoy and endure the life fully. And literature has got this wonderful capacity of molding the individuals and getting us with a fine perspective so as to lead a great life. And hence the superiority of literature as a human discourse. Now, this is his opinion about literature. Now, let's see what is his opinion as about poets and people who are writing poetry. His definition of a poet. A poet for him is a man among men. So this is his definition of a poet. A poet is a very ordinary person. He does not have any extra qualities or extra sort of blessings, and he is not a divine man. He's just an ordinary man. He or she is just an ordinary man. A poet do not possess any special powers which is otherwise denied to the rest of the humanity. So a poet is just an ordinary person. He gave priority to biographical criticism, relating the poet as an ordinary man with life and as well as a poet as an artist. Now, according to Dr. Samuel Johnson, he propounded the fact that for analysis of a poetry, it would be worthwhile also to look into the personal biographical account of the poet so that one can correlate both these ideas, that is the biography, the spent life of the poet, and he wanted us to correlate the biography of a poet with that of the actual poem itself, so that the poem can be better understood in the light of the biography of the particular poet. So this is what is called as biographical criticism, and Dr. Samuel Johnson, as we know him, he's a great propounder of biographical criticism. So now. Now, we had already heard about his opinions on literature, his opinion on being a poet, and now let us move on to his thoughts on criticism. What actually should be criticism? Criticism, according to him, is subordinate an activity to literature. So according to Samuel Johnson, he was of the opinion that literature is in a pedestal position, is in a superior position, and criticism is a byproduct of the literature, and hence criticism occupies a secondary position to that of literature. Now, mind you, when we were discussing the earlier critics in English literature, for example, Philip Sidney was trying to equate criticism and literature. But on the other hand, here Dr. Samuel Johnson accords criticism only a secondary nature. Okay, literature being the primary importance, while criticism of a secondary importance, and criticism being treated as a byproduct out of literature itself. Now, here is a quote on which defines his definition of criticism. This appeared in Rambler number 208. Let's see this particular quote. Criticism, in my opinion, is only to be ranked among the subordinate and instrumental arts. So criticism is only instrumental. It is something which aids the movement of literature. It is something which propagates literature. It's something which teaches as a best in the literature, and it is always secondary or subordinate to the actual literature itself. Now, here is yet another quote which appeared in Rambler number 92. It is the task of criticism to establish principles to improve opinion and knowledge. So according to him, it's a duty of the critic, it is a duty of the criticism as such to establish the ideals, the best, propagate the best, and improve our opinion, sharpen our opinion on a literary product, and improve our knowledge on that particular literary artifact. Now moving down, these are some of the major ideals, thoughts which we can use to define Dr. Samuel Johnson as a critic. Now, moving down, let's move into his actual criticism. Right. Now, let us also take a look into his major critical works. So here are some of the major critical works, the articles which were contributed to the Rambler from the year 1750 to 1752, the edition of Shakespeare, 1765, and the most important critical work, the Lives, which was written and published during this time span, 1779 to 81. Now, in this particular video, I'm going to deal in detail with the Lives and as well as a few details on the editions of Shakespeare. Now, let's move into the Lives. Let's see what Lives is and what Dr. Johnson meant by creating this particular critical book. Johnson's Lives is a contribution to criticism and scholarship and Boswell, his biographer, calls it the richest, most beautiful, and indeed most perfect production of his pen. So this is highly recommended as one of his greatest critical work, and hence let us focus on this particular work. And you have just heard the opinion by James Boswell. Now, in fact, he was commissioned by a committee of London booksellers to undertake to review the life and works of major English poets from Chaucer to his day. Now, this was a sort of an assignment. This book was a sort of an assignment which was assigned to this literary man, and he was asked to review the life and works. Mind you, he was very much interested with biography and especially biographical criticism. So he was asked to prepare a short bio note of the major English poets and as well as the major contributions that were made right from the time of Geoffrey Chaucer to his time. So if you are going to read this particular work, you get a perfect account of all the major English poets, right from the 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer, up until his times. Now, however, he dropped the medieval and Renaissance poets and instead chose 52 lives from Cowley to Gray, with the exception of George Herbert and Robert Herrick. So here are more details into the particular work. The lives of the poets are arranged in the order of the dates of their death, and each poet were described in a threefold division: biography, character, and criticism. So the lives, they were arranged based on the order of the dates of the death of the poets. And when you move into each account, you find three divisions. So the first division, you find the biography of the poet. You find a detailed note on the biography. Secondly, you find a note on the character of that particular poet, and as well as then followed by that, there would be an enlistment of the major works and also his critical opinions on these works and on, in general, the writing of that particular poet. Now, the biographical part is, along as containing the poet's birth, education, and growth, the second session, character, is the shortest of the three, and the third contains a critical appreciation and evaluation of the poet, which is of middle length. So here you go. Here it explains that the division in its exact manner. So we have three divisions for each poet, namely the biography of the poet, the character of the poet, and a general introduction and criticism on the works and a sort of critical appreciation of the works that were done by the poets themselves. Now, criticism is added as a useful adjunct to the biography. The three sections are in a way connected to each other and are instead independent units. These three units are kept separately, but they are meant to be interlinked with each other, and this creates a perfect cohesive write-up. And especially the note on criticism is a perfect appreciation on the poet themselves. Now, George Watson, in his book, The Literary Critics, says the lives created the foundation of the 19th century school of historical criticism by elevating the literary life to a new critical eminence. So, according to one of the major critic, George Watson, this particular work, he says, is one of the major critical books which were produced during this time, and it gives a perfect account of all the major poets from 14th century Geoffrey Chaucer up until the times of Samuel Johnson, and hence this is a perfect work of historical criticism. Historical criticism, that is, it traces through the history and the evolution of the poetry and as well as criticism in English literature, and hence the significance of this particular work. Now, moving down, let's also discuss on his opinions on Shakespeare, and his opinion on Shakespeare appeared in Preface to Shakespeare. Let's read it. Shakespeare is a great dramatist, since most of his plays present a true presentation of the general human nature. Moreover, his characters are faithful representations of humanity, who are both significant as in the individual as well as in the universal levels. So many of you had read the works of Shakespeare, and we know that he's a renowned Elizabethan dramatist. He's a renowned dramatist of the world itself, and this is largely because of the fact that his plays are universal in nature, because it is a compendium of all the sorts of character types and all the sorts of life situations that we meet in our short lifespan, and hence the significance of Shakespeare. Now, um, just as epics are concerned, you might have heard of epics. So epics, just as epics are can be applied to the individual as well as universal level. So such is a magnitude of the Shakespearean works, because it applies both to the individual as well as to the universal principles. Now, moving down, Shakespearean plays are replete with practical axioms and domestic wisdom, and hence reading embellishes our perspective and philosophy of life. Shakespearean plays, they are full of positive quotes. Many of you might be in the habit of sharing these quotes, and a lot of domestic wisdom, and hence the reading of Shakespeare must be propagated, must be facilitated. And mind you, when you look into the Shakespearean studies, Shakespeare was very popular during the Elizabethan times, and after the Elizabethan times and up until the rule of King Charles I, Shakespearean theaters literally flourished in England. But then after that, there was the period of interregnum, or there was a period of Puritan age, which resulted in the banning of Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was almost forgotten for several years. Now, it is to the credit of neoclassical critics such as John Dryden, especially Dr. Samuel Johnson, that he gave proper credits. They accorded proper credits to Shakespeare, and this revived the reading and appreciation of Shakespearean plays. So if at all we are appreciating Shakespearean plays at present rate, a large part of appreciation should also befall on John Dryden as well as Dr. Samuel Johnson, because they try to revive and reinvent Shakespeare. Now, much of the previous critics had criticized Shakespeare for having violated the classical norms of drama by the unfair mixing of tragedies and comedies. However, Johnson justifies its use, since life is a mixture of joys and sorrows, and hence a tragic comedies mirrors the life. So according to Dr. Samuel Johnson, just as John Dryden was as we know, we often have the belief that he is a strict neoclassicist. But again, when we read John Dryden's criticism, we understand that he's also a liberal neoclassicist. For example, similarly, Dr. Samuel Johnson too is a liberal neoclassicist, because he is favoring the mixing of tragedies and comedies, because according to the classical precepts, according to the classical norms, if at all a drama is prepared as a tragedy, it has to be catering to be 100% tragedy, and if at all a comedy is prepared as if at all a comedy is prepared, it has to cater to be named only as a comedy. And there should not be a mixing of tragedies and comedies. However, Dr. Samuel Johnson, he propounds that the mixing of tragedies and comedies in Shakespearean plays is perfectly okay, because in our life, in our personal life, if you look into our personal life, we find an admixture of both tragedy and comedy, and hence it is perfectly justified that Shakespeare had made or mixed tragedies and comedies, and hence he favors tragicomedies. I hope my point was clear, though in between there was a disturbance. Now, moving on to the next point, Shakespearean plays were also criticized for the violation of three unities: namely the unity of action, place, and time. So most of you might know that Shakespearean plays never followed the Aristotelian concept, Aristotle's concept of the unity of action, place, and time. According to the a unity of action, the drama should have a perfect beginning, a perfect middle leading into a perfect conclusion. Similarly, the unity of place, the drama has to take place in a single place, in a single location. Similarly, with the unity of time, it has to happen in the single revolution of a day. That is, it has to end within 24 hours. So and Aristotle had especially focused on the unity of action. The rest of the two unities were later added into the three unities. Now, according to many of us know that Shakespearean plays do not conform with these three unities. And hence, Shakespearean plays were criticized a lot of times. However, Dr. Samuel Johnson justifies again Shakespeare in the mixing of in not conforming to the unities. According to him, his plays perfectly conforms to the unity of action, for his plots have a perfect beginning, middle, and an end. See, he says that the unity of action is the most important, and Shakespeare had justified it. He had been truthful to it because most of the Shakespearean plays have a perfect beginning, a perfect middle, and a perfect ending. However, he rejects the conventions of unity of time and place since it creates constraints to the writer and it prevents the pleasure principle of the audience. However, he rejects the rest of the two unities, that is a unity of time and place, because Shakespeare too had not conformed it, because it creates a lot of restriction on the part of the writers when they will have to limit themselves to present the drama in a single locale or in a single day itself. So that is a sort of restriction to the writer, and hence it is perfectly okay on the part of Shakespeare to reject the last two unities and conform to the unity of action, which is most important, and Shakespeare had done it. So Shakespearean plays are justified, and hence it is of great importance, says Dr. Samuel Johnson. Now, this is all about Dr. Samuel Johnson's criticisms. Now, this brings an end to this presentation. Right. So hope you had got a better insight on Dr. Samuel Johnson with this short presentation. Thank you for listening.